Hello and welcome to Power to the People with me, Graeme Pryce. Feels a bit strange not saying countdown to power, really. As you can see, I've put in some effort to make it visually a little bit more interesting in the background. Yeah, I mean, the winds of change have blown upon us and there's a lot of change happening. Let's leave Keir Starmer to get settled in and put reform on a back burner to bubble in their own bile and have a look at what the Tories did, what the Tories didn't do, and why they were undoubtedly not just the worst government in living memory, but the worst government in the history of the United Kingdom. There's far too much to say in one video, of course, and while I think it's important to digest what has happened to our once great nation and who did what and who is to blame, I also think it's time to promote unity, not throw blame and shame about. You might have noticed the new logo is purple with a bit of yellow. It's not intended to reference the state of my choppers after years of not being able to get near an NHS dentist. No, it's intended to signify the coming together of the red and the blue with a little bit of yellow to represent the Lib Dems. I haven't included reform. So, while Suella Braverman tries to become leader by bringing all her most homophobic milkshakes to the yard, Mark Francois fails to understand basic numbers in the selection process for the leader of the 1922 committee, and Kemi Badenoch hides away, plotting how to use transphobia and sheer twattery to position herself as the leader of the utter failure their party has become. We're going to have a little look at what they did over the last 14 years, and the monstrous idiots they've foisted on us in the past. We'll get right on it after this. Just a quick interjection, I won't keep you long. YouTube's algorithms run off 4 things: whether you've liked, commented and subscribed, and how long you watched the video for. If you could do one of the first 3, and maybe just watch the video a bit longer than you might have otherwise, it would be hugely appreciated and it helps the channel loads. Thank you. It's worth remembering that the beginning of the Conservatives' time in office didn't arise from a clear and concise decision to end the Labour government and move on with a sense of optimism and renewal, like a lot of us felt on the morning of the 5th of July. The polls in 2010 and the predictions of the results weren't pleasant for either Labour or the Conservatives. Gordon Brown called the election in the wake of the expenses scandal, where we found out that MPs of all colours had been utterly abusing the expenses system. They really were taking the piss, and it seemed like a massive scandal at the time, and indeed it was a big scandal, but looking back now, it doesn't even compare to most of the scandals that the Tories put us through, does it? The idea of TV debates was quite new at the time, and it was in that new and unusual setting that the Lib Dems' Nick Clegg managed to shine. I agree with Nick, remember that? And he ended up scoring a number of seats that made him something of a kingmaker when the result was declared to be a hung parliament. In an ill-thought-out attempt to parry his party into a position of power, he went into coalition with the Conservatives and inadvertently made David Cameron the Prime Minister. David Cameron did seem quite capable at first, and I still think he was the best of all 5 Tory Prime Ministers. Though saying that is like trying to decide which of 5 kicks in the bollocks is the most pleasant, so, don't take it as too much of an accolade. There was a hint of the pathetic dishonesty and gaslighting ways that we were going to see, even that early on when Cameron Osborne and others decided to wave around the joke letter left by Liam Burns saying that there was no money left in the Treasury and portray it as some sort of childish and unusually nasty jibe. Without mentioning that it's parliamentary tradition for an outgoing government to leave such notes, and Liam Burns certainly wasn't the first to do so, and Tory leaders and ministers had done so in the past. In fact, the Tories still have the cheek to try and play that trick right up to the current day, still trying to depend on the political naivety of the public to attack their opponents. Cameron, of course, appointed George Gideon Osborne, who immediately set about enforcing crushing austerity that is still badly affecting the UK to this day. At that year's Tory party conference, Cameron claimed that the Conservative Lib Dem coalition government would rule with freedom, fairness and responsibility. I don't know about you, but that is how I remember it. The Lib Dems had to abandon their previously steadfast assurance that they wouldn't support the introduction of tuition fees, for which they're still apologising over a decade later. The biggest achievement of Cameron's government probably was to introduce same-sex marriage for couples, which seems ironic in light of Suella Braverman's recent outbursts, doesn't it? But that certainly wasn't the biggest thing that Cameron did, or did to us. Not by a long shot. After the defection of Douglas Carswell to UKIP, that was what Reform were called at the time, and with the ERG, the ironically named European Research Group, circling and threatening, David Cameron completely fucking shit the bed and called the Brexit referendum in order to appease some right-wing dickheads in his party, Jacob Rees-Mogg being one of them. It seems his narcissism and sheer arrogance backfired though, and he may have genuinely believed that whoever was leading Labour would also campaign vociferously for Remain, but after the media helped Cameron secure a reasonably small but shocking majority against Ed Miliband in 2015, Ed Miliband ceased to be the Labour leader and Jeremy Corbyn stepped up, an MP who had long been a Eurosceptic. Corbyn ran an insipid and half-arsed campaign that he clearly didn't have very much personal faith in. The media didn't help very much, and Vote Leave won by a small margin, helped in no small part by the sheer dishonesty of people like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg and other such idiotic figures that we've thankfully voted out of office lately. Cameron didn't like that result though. His ego was far too large to deal with failure on that scale, and he summarily resigned, saying he could not go forward as Prime Minister when the country had rejected his opinion so resoundingly on Brexit. As Danny Dyer famously commented not long afterwards on a breakfast TV show, he left us with a ridiculous and enigmatic puzzle that was Brexit, and he fucked off to put his trotters up in France. A twat. There's a lot more we could say about the austerity era and the impact it had, but let's move on for the sake of succinctity and have a look at what came next. And what came next was the then Home Secretary Theresa May becoming the next Prime Minister. I don't remember very much about the leadership contest, if I'm honest, or how an utterly unlikable and inhuman creature like Theresa May managed to win it. There's a lot to criticise Theresa May about, obviously, but she was certainly a more dedicated and realistic choice of leader than any of the three that came after her. I tend to think that she was the last of the Tory Prime Ministers that had any degree of respect for the position that she was in. And while I can't say that I didn't hate her and wasn't over the moon when she resigned, I did think that when she sobbed at the lectern about the country she loved, I think it came from an honest place. I think she meant it. She was an unpleasant Home Secretary, many would say racist, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. She was also very black and white in her approach to policy a lot of the time. And I'm going to give her some due here, which is very unusual when talking about a Tory Prime Minister, but I did think that she did want to do what was best for the country and not just the party. The saying that she had inherited a poisoned chalice became quite common, and it is fair to say that she was presented with what most would consider an impossible task in trying to satisfy the swivel-eyed right-wing lunatics in the party, the remaining few moderate MPs that were still in the party, and the Leavers and Remainers in society. I don't and didn't envy her, but that doesn't mean I like her either. Her time was so over-absorbed with Brexit bullshit that practically nothing else got done. Nothing good anyway. And there isn't much that we can attribute to her premiership, really. And then she was stupid enough to call an early election in 2017. She went on to give us a masterclass in how to utterly repel normal working class people during her campaign. I remember visiting my aunt, that I have mentioned before, and her saying that she thought she might have to vote for Theresa May because she simply couldn't stand Corbyn and she didn't think he'd be a good Prime Minister. Well, we'll never know if that was true or not, but less than a week after that visit, I got a letter from her saying that she'd completely changed her mind because of what went on to become known as the dementia tax and because of May's general attitude to pensioners. Another thing that made a huge difference to a lot of people, and to my aunt especially, was when Theresa May stunned everybody by having the sheer out-of-touch stupidity to say that she wanted to bring back fox hunting. That, amongst a few other things, seemed to illustrate to the public that whether or not she was strong and stable, she was certainly not in touch with ordinary people. Her attempts to make Brexit work for all did absolutely anything but that. An election was a stupid waste of time, and Boris Johnson was watching and waiting in the wings with people like Dominic Cummings advising him on how he could ride the big ship Brexit to a stunning victory. And all he had to do was put his imaginary morals, honour and decency aside and tell appalling and blatant lies about what he could achieve when he would be the greatest Prime Minister we've ever seen. Cummings was something like a cross between the worst Tory MP you can imagine, the Mekong from the Dan Dare comics in the 70s, and a shitbag vulture waiting to swoop in and eat the carcass of the UK. And he had an inordinately large amount of influence on the leadership election. Jeremy Hunt did quite well, but it was never really in doubt, and, it was Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, figures were released showing that 300,000 people had died as a result of George Osborne's austerity, and Philip Alston, a special UN investigator, released a report saying that the Conservative government had committed grave violations of the rights of disabled people in the UK with their welfare reforms. But of course the media ignored that because the Tories had told them to say that all disabled people are just scroungers and liars. So honesty, decency and what should have been utter shock and shame at what the Conservatives were putting the country through was sufficiently hidden. Those that attempted to highlight it were called, lefties and, the blob and that kind of thing. And before we knew it, Boris twat-flap fucking Johnson was the Prime Minister. Of course, anybody with any normal degree of reasoning, critical thinking skills, or even a vaguely reasonable level of intelligence could see from the very beginning that Boris Johnson was totally unfit for office. But those qualities had already fallen out of the arse of the Conservative Party by then, and Johnson began with the same dishonesty he intended to carry on with by sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to tell lies to the then very elderly Queen in order to prorogue Parliament. He did this because he knew that he wanted to win a snap election by misleading the public into thinking that he could somehow solve the massive problem that Brexit had become. But he knew that if most of the decent, intelligent MPs from other parties actually had time to scrutinise his plans, and some of the MPs from his own party, then they'd clearly see that they were a sham of lies, false promises and a poor understanding of the situation. People who've followed the channel for a while will likely know how I feel about Boris Johnson. In my opinion, he is singularly the most dishonest, disgraceful, deplorable and disgusting man to ever be allowed anywhere near Westminster. I genuinely think Guy Fawkes entered Westminster with better intentions than Boris Johnson. Cromwell was an absolute monster, but he was a better man than Boris Johnson. At least he'd found God, and his God wasn't money or power. There is such a huge catalogue of utter failure and dishonesty attributable to Johnson that I could be here all day talking about him, but it would depress me and it might leave you quite angry, so I don't want to dwell on that absolute fucking shambles of a man. By the point he got in, anybody sensible could see that the Tories had abandoned any idea of governing for the good of the country, and it had all just become about the party and about Brexit. Who would survive? Who would Johnson allow to stay in office? How was he going to navigate the impossible Brexit farce with such a divided party and country? His answer was to call an election and campaign on an utterly fabricated platform of sheer bullshit, narcissistic lies, a grievous showboating and populist propaganda. His campaign was beyond pathetic. But the media fully backed him and told the gullible people that he was going to build those 40 hospitals and he was going to get Brexit done. The fact that during his campaign he refused to do public debates after he was laughed at in one of his earlier ones, or the fact that he hid in a fridge at one point from a journalist, or the fact that he snatched the phone out of the hand of another journalist who confronted him with a picture of a sick child lying on a hospital floor waiting to be treated. Now, all of that was brushed aside by his friends in the client media, even when it came out that he'd helped his friend Darius Guppy to arrange for another journalist to be beaten up, but not hospitalised. Oh no, he's not a monster. The media still insisted on treating Johnson like he was the answer to all our problems. He wasn't. What a fucking surprise. And eventually he was buried beneath the weight of his own scandal and lies, especially the Partygate scandal, and we haven't even mentioned that. Though let's remember, that wasn't actually what finished him off. No, he stood up in Parliament as the trusted premier of our nation and he told us all barefaced lies. First, there were no parties. That was a lie. Then he didn't know there were parties. That was a lie. Then he knew there were parties, but he hadn't attended any of them. That was a lie. Then he had attended, but he didn't know he was at a party. That was a lie. Apparently he'd just been assaulted with a birthday cake. But even then, our media told everybody that they were wrong and they just hadn't stuck their noses far up his arse enough to understand how brilliant he is. And Keir Starmer had a korma and a beer, and some nasty little Tory prick illegally sneaked onto private property and took a picture of him through a window. The Daily Mail reported on it every single day as if it was exactly the same thing as what Johnson had done. And even now, you will still find absolute fucking idiots standing up for Boris Johnson and saying that he was just surprised in the corridor with a birthday cake. And that's all that Partygate really was. And that we should forget about it because Keir Starmer was pictured eating a korma and drinking a beer. To be honest, the fact that he orders korma when he has an Indian is a slight concern. I mean, who the fuck orders a korma? But regardless, the whole Chris Pincher scandal was actually what finished him off, not Partygate. It led to about 57 MPs resigning in protest at Boris Johnson's dishonesty and total unfitness for office. It took them long enough to realise it, didn't it? I absolutely guarantee that if you go to Twitter right now, you will find that the last thing Nadine Dorries was talking about is how amazing Boris fucking Johnson is and how the Tories would still be in office if we just let him get away with absolutely anything he liked and not expected him to treat the office of Prime Minister with the same respect that other people had because he's Boris Johnson. I've had a few crushes in me time, but nothing as intense, ridiculous and public as Madnad's obsession with Boris Johnson. Thankfully, the country didn't share her obsession for the fat, lying, smirking, twat-faced sack of shit. And he resigned eventually, though he refused to immediately leave Downing Street, and we had to put up with his smoke fucking face for a few more months. The bastard. I think maybe I better take Lindsay Hall's advice and have a little cup of tea and calm down before I move on to the next section now. I heard James O'Brien say something about how sometimes people who might not necessarily have had an education at Eton or a private school upbringing can still have a clarity of reason and display a level of innocent honesty that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg could only dream of. Hopefully I'm about to do that. I'm going to keep the Liz Truss section pretty short. Nobody who isn't a fucking idiot thinks that Liz Truss isn't a fucking idiot. She very, very clearly is a woman who is not just stupid as fuck, but is too stupid to understand that she is stupid as fuck. She thinks she's smart and nobody's really that much smarter than her. She thinks she's normal, despite being the toppermost leftmost of any Dunning-Kruger scale she could ever appear on. There's one reason Liz Truss won that leadership election. I apologise in advance if what I'm about to say offends anybody, but as the only people that are likely to be offended are old, grey-haired, gaslit, gullible racists with fully paid-up memberships to the Tory party, I'm not sure I can say that my apology is that sincere. Liz Truss became Prime Minister because the Tories had spent a decade convincing their hardcore fans that it's absolutely fine to be racist. Then they gave them the choice of a privately educated white woman from an affluent background or a privately educated brown-faced person from a rich background. Guess what they chose? From day one, anyone could see that Liz Truss was, and still is, a complete fucking idiot. We ended up with that absolute shambles of a woman who cost us all dearly and utterly destroyed the Tories' undeserved reputation for economic competence because their membership are mostly racist old white men who either read the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Telegraph if you think they're a bit more middle class, and listen to the lies of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Lee Anderson and Nigel Farage on GBBs. Liz Truss was famously outlasted in office by a lettuce and resigned as Prime Minister just a short time after assuring the House of Commons that she wasn't a quitter. Watching that incompetent, stupid little woman not even have the decency to congratulate her opponent or even graciously accept defeat on the morning of July the 5th was one of the sweetest moments of the election. Almost better than seeing Jacob Rees-Mogg lose his seat, but only almost. Honestly, I'm struggling not to get too angry to articulate my point here now. Talking about Johnson always winds me up, but they never stepped upward after him, did they? Liz Truss was an appallingly stupid joke of a Prime Minister. She achieved nothing except to trash her own already ignorant and pointless reputation, and thank fucking God she at least had the decency to resign. And the only thing she ever did that was decent. I'd imagine you know that the candidates are generally told who was won before stepping out. This was the reason the announcement was delayed for 40 minutes. She refused to go out there and take her medicine. You can just imagine it, can't you? I'm sorry, Liz, you haven't won this time. What do you mean? I'm Liz Truss. I'm the incumbent. I used to be Prime Minister. Yes, but you were a shit Prime Minister and everybody hates you. You haven't won. Yes, but don't be silly. I'm an MP. If I hadn't won, I won't be an MP anymore. And that's just silly. No, Liz, you haven't won. You're going to have to go out there and accept it. Don't be silly. I'm Liz Truss. I'm an MP. No, Liz, you're not listening. You've lost. That is a disgrace. Just imagine it, can't you? Fuck you, Liz. Fuck you and fuck the Tories. I've just noticed that I wrote part 5 instead of part 5 on my notes for this section, but I think we'll go with it because it seems kind of apt really, doesn't it? Sunak was about as attractive and effective as a lingering fart in a particularly small lift. After realising the options were Rishi Sunak, who is brown, or Kemi Badenoch, who is brown, or Suella Braverman, who is brown, the racist, xenophobic, Brexit-obsessed fucking wankers who actually had a vote in the Tory election leadership decided Sunak was the best of a bad bunch, despite thousands of them then taking to social media to say that his appointment showed that Muslims are taking over the UK. Sunak isn't a Muslim, he's a Hindu, but it was a demonstration of how the people that we'd reluctantly been forced to trust to choose our next Prime Minister were generally ill-informed, racist fucking morons and cretins who had no idea what they were talking about. What did you think of Sunak? I think his speeches after he lost the election showed an actually more realistic and caring side to the man than anything he'd done during the election campaign or his time in office. I might make a video just about the sheer hypocrisy and ridiculousness of Sunak's premiership. So I'm not going to dwell on him too much. His recent history, isn't he? But let's not give him too much credit either. He spent the whole election campaign repeating stupid, easily disproven lies and telling the British public that they're all wrong and he is right. He got quite tetchy about it a few times, didn't he? No wonder he lost the election, the nasty, stupid, easily led, gullible little prick. How did he ever end up being the richest Prime Minister in British history? He's clearly better at massaging figures and cheating the system than he is at actually leading the party, because he's just led the Conservative Party to the worst defeat they've ever seen. And my God, is it deserved. I don't care what you think of Keir Starmer. It'd be a boring world if we all had the same opinions, wouldn't it? But don't tell me it could possibly be worse than any of the last 5 fucking jokers we had. We can't ever let the Tories get into office ever again. The speeches, the attitudes, the ongoing attempts by the various daft bastards to try and lead the party at the moment should show you exactly what the Tories are. They haven't changed and they never will. They never deserve to take office again. And God forgive you if you ever vote Tory ever again. I certainly won't. How dare anybody ever consider putting our nation through another Tory government after what we've just witnessed? Okay, I've had a little calm down now, and all that remains to say is thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. What a period to live through, eh? Food bank use went from less than 40,000 people receiving parcels a year to over 2 million. Homelessness increased by up to 150% in some places. NHS waiting lists have gone from less than 2 million people waiting less than 3 months to over 7 million people waiting over a year. Some people waiting up to 3 years. Every single person in this country, other than that elusive 1%, is poorer than they were in 2010. You can't get a GP appointment unless you can psychically predict when you're going to be ill. If your nan has a fall and you phone an ambulance, it might take 10 hours to arrive. Depends where you live. It's a postcode lottery. There are pensioners dying every single day, alone and forgotten in hospital corridors. Only the very luckiest of us have seen a dentist for years, obviously. Don't you fucking dare tell me that the Tories made any progress. We haven't just had a Tory government for 14 years. We've suffered a Tory government for 14 years. We'd have probably suffered less if we were invaded by somebody. What they have done to this country and to our people is absolutely unforgivable. I think I ended up more angry than explanatory in this video, and I know I left a lot out. But if you have enjoyed it, or you've had a giggle with me, then please hit the like and subscribe, because it helps loads. If you'd like to make a little donation to the channel, you can find links to PayPal and Patreon in the descriptions box. And if you've just agreed with what I've said and you'd like to buy me a drink, then there's a buy me a coffee link down there too. I don't drink anymore, so sadly you can't buy me a pint, but I do enjoy a Starbucks latte as much as anybody else. We've got the monsters out of power. We've allowed a few new monsters in, but they are in charge. We need to march towards a better future now. And I think that future will include a properly proportional system of government, but that's something to talk about for another day, isn't it? The problems aren't over, but at least we do have a government that wants to solve problems instead of just use them to win votes or create them to win votes. We can all look forward to finally returning power to the people. I can see that you're particularly ecstatic about Keir Starmer being Prime Minister, aren't you, Dan? Are you over the moon about there being a new Labour government? I think maybe you should try to contain your excitement, love. You don't want to wear yourself out.